All right. I'm so excited to have what I think is a really important societal issue addressed this morning on air. It's surrounding prison for profit and people who are being put in prison for life for nonviolent crimes. And specifically, I have online the producer of a documentary called Lifers, and it's focusing on people who are in prison for life for marijuana, and he also expanded the topic to include, I asked him to please include other nonviolent offenders who are in prison for life, because the whole concept of putting a nonviolent person in prison for life is unconscionable to me. So I'm so happy to welcome Jeff. I always call you Jeffy Fresh. So Jeff, how do you pronounce your last name?
Well, when I was at KPFK and in Los Angeles on the DJ line, and thank you so much for having me on. My DJ name is Jeffy Fresh, and my back name is Jeff Eichen.
Eichen, yeah. Okay. I didn't want to butcher it.
There you go. Yeah, no, it's not. Everyone does, but you got it now.
Jeff Eichen. Okay, Jeff. I'm so proud of you for your passion and for being so socially conscious. I know that all of us have our own little battles that we are taking on to change the system, and yours is of course legalizing marijuana across the nation, not just in certain states. And my pet peeve is, freeing everybody who is their lives are just being wasted away in prison for nonviolent crimes. So I'm basically focusing on the big macrocosm while you're kind of tackling the microcosm, but they're both very important and interconnected. But I posted it on Facebook last night, and I got some pretty interesting comments, Jeff. But I want to say that the documentary is debuting next weekend in Seattle. It's at the Seattle Film Institute, Jeff?
The Seattle Film Institute, yes, you can Google the SFI, Seattle Film Institute, and we're doing a preview, and we're having some incredible hemp activists from over the years, Chris Conrad and Mickey Norris, who wrote the book Shattered Lives way back in the days about prisoners in jail for marijuana without parole. Mm-hmm. And they also just recently wrote a book called Human Rights and the U.S. Drug War. So we're not focusing on just marijuana prisoners, but it is absurd that there are plant prisoners in jail. So our premiere is not for the full movie. It's a preview of what's to come on our 6-part series.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, and I'm sure that with it being a 6-part series that you will include other aspects of nonviolent crime. I think it's just absolutely absurd that people go to go to jail here in LA for tickets. It's the whole privatization of the prisons was an atrocity that was kind of just slipped under our noses without our permission or without us even knowing what was going on. And so I think whenever you have a system like that is set up for profit, where literally the people who are put in for life under the 3 strikes law rule, they literally become slaves, and they are working for private corporations for life. I mean, it's a pretty insidious. I think. I'm going to let you pick up on that because it gets me.
Well, the Lifers motto, we have several one-liners, and they address the one-liners so we can talk intelligently to the folks that need to hear this, that are in charge right now to make decisions. And one of our lines is clemency, reform, and restitution. And I'm on the radio with Kristen Floor every Sunday on her blog talk radio, VOW, that's Prisoners of War, Victims of the War. the drug war. And so what she says also is that it's a shame that anybody is in jail for a plant, let alone for a nonviolent crime. And so she also told me about her father dying in prison, and he had a legal establishment. And they came in and took him and her mother, and they put them in jail. He died in jail, and the following day, she went in to see her dad, and he was still shackled to the bed.
Wow. It's cruel and unusual punishment, and you would think that the statistics are also atrocious for America. The fact that one in literally every 15 African American males are in prison, and they only represent 12% of the entire population. And only 30% of the population is minority, and they represent 60% of the prison population. So there is also the issue of the disproportionate number of people of color who are being put in prison specifically for nonviolent crimes. So that's a travesty in and of itself.
Well, to level the playing field here, it's amazing that that people get so much money for throwing a pigskin and dunking a hoop. So the proportion of the planet is not feeling right now. Mm-hmm. So through film, I think we can reach more people, and through an episodic documentary, we can address more issues and get our film to the people that matter, to the parents, and to the people that don't know that this is actually even happening, that there are people in life without parole. For gosh sakes, when I interviewed Jeff Mazansky, who, by the way, we're flying in because he's a free man now after 21 years, will be at our premiere in Seattle on the 20th next weekend, everybody. So get your tickets and come on down. And it's going to be amazing when Jeff said that for gosh sakes, we were doing this for free, and rapers and murderers are coming and going while I sit in here because of a three-strike, absurd, outdated law. It never was in date. It should have never been.
Yeah, I remember when I first came to California in 1988. A few years after that, the whole three strikes law was promoted specifically for violent criminals, and they used a young kid who had been kidnapped and raped by a person who was on parole to get people's passions and sympathy up to say, yes, keep these nonviolent criminals in prison. And, that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about nonviolent crimes and people being put in prison for life. So a lot of laws are done that way, where we're told it's one thing, and then as soon as the law is passed, they go, aha, gotcha. And then, I was just stunned to find out, later that young people were being imprisoned for life for nonviolent crimes. So that, I think, is the real atrocity, is how we're sold one bag of goods, and then we get an entirely other one once we vote on something.
Well, the absurdity for a lot of things, it was against the law, like in Vermont. It's like a bathroom book, and you read these absurd laws to have mosquitoes in a pond outside your house. They'll write you a ticket. So the absurdity of this issue is not to be laughed at or to be looked sideways, and it's time, because Obama and Justin Trudeau are dedicated to releasing nonviolent criminals, because our criminal system in America is privatized, and the greed is so huge, and the families are so affected that children don't get to have their mommies or daddies when they're put away unreasonably, and it's just a crime. I have a a one paper to read for you that explains my passion and my story, and I think the viewers may really enjoy this. My name is Jeff Eichen. I'm director now and creator of Lifers the Movie, a documentary series that's going deep inside the war on drugs. It's Lifers' job to awaken the people and the governments in charge to tell this long overdue story. My intention is to be the voice. I feel one of the most important urgent issues of our modern society. We must overturn old and outdated policies of humans being put in prison simply for believing in a plant and or a nonviolent criminal crime, and put an end to prohibition. Many of you don't even know there are people in prison for life without parole. The story began in the 1930s with publisher William Randolph Hearst. Due to his intense desire to monopolize the newspaper industry, Mr. Hearst teamed up with the lumber industry, who produces paper for newspapers, to make massive profits and stop growing hemp. Mr. Hearst proposed the federal government to ban all marijuana plants and hemp products at once. He succeeded in making hemp become illegal to farm, grow, smoke, eat, and or continue its uses for good causes. As the granddaddy hemp activist Jack Herrera said, ritually recited, paper, fiber, and fuel. And now, medicine, food, like the hemp seed.
Wow.
This controlled, outdated prohibition is coming to an end for all nonviolent prisoners, including plant prisoners, whom needs to be freed now. Our current President Obama is asking for the release of all nonviolent prisoners, and still it's a draconian system. Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, may have made the best case for legalizing pot ever. He's gone public stating the release of all plant prisoners. To put this fully, Lifers is dedicated to all nonviolent prisoners stuck in the current system. While we still have these two high-profile officials in office service on our watch, we cannot afford to let another day go by, everybody. We must join them in getting our message told, and through this documentary, Lifers, on lifersthemovie.com, prohibition never worked on alcohol. Everyone needs to know the magical, substantiated and documented properties of the marijuana plant. It is a reality. Lifers sets the record straight. My movie will set the record straight. And prohibition now, release each and every plant prisoner and nonviolent prisoner locked away on the inside. Lifers says free the prisoners, free the plant, including clemency, reform, and restitution.
All right. I now have Morgan Christopher with me. Morgan, I'd like for you to join in on the discussion and comment on what Jeff and I, your feelings about this topic.
Absolutely. Well, my feelings about the topic, it's interesting that this is premiering in Seattle because I just moved to Seattle in May, and I have, kind of mixed feelings that I didn't have before moving to a city that has such a high drug abuse rate and crime, nonviolent crime, because of that. I am absolutely against the three-strike rule. I'm absolutely against life imprisonment for people who do not commit violent drug crimes. That being said, moving to a city where I've witnessed a lot of crime and a lot of leniency for people who are habitual criminals, whether that's fueled by drug use or not, has complicated my feelings. I'm wondering, is that something that you came across in interviewing inmates for the documentary and just your research in general, and how that maybe has influenced how you look at the macro issue or micro issue when you're in a city like Seattle, where, it's great that I have a very low chance of being murdered or raped, but don't relish the chance that, I'm going to be robbed or, my car stolen or anything of the sort by people who do this frequently, because there is a lot of leniency, because Seattle is a very progressive city,
Morgan,
especially on this matter.
Morgan, I want to distinguish that we're not talking about violent crimes. We're only talking about people going to prison for, doing drugs or possession of drugs, but not, we are making that distinction. But Jeff, I would like for you to comment on that.
Yeah. Because Seattle has a very low violent crime rate, very low.
Okay, so that is what we're addressing. All right, so
Yes.
Jeff.
Well, things seem to be changing now that there's 5 states, including Washington, D.C., that are legalizing the medical use of marijuana and the recreational use. My theory and my concern and hope is that because Bill Maher said on TV, we got gay marriage and marijuana is next, that, prohibition never worked on alcohol,
Right.
and yet it's a violent drug. It creates anger and frustration. And if you talk about alcohol versus pot or marijuana as a recreational tool, or the choice of relaxation after a hard day's work, which our parents got, and marijuana is illegal now. With marijuana, you just either get the munchies, go to sleep, or have a party, turn the music up. And so alcohol's a little more angry, or a lot more. So because gay marriage got all the way to Supreme Court, through my film and through our intentions, we want to level the playing field globally, not for me for recreational purpose, but for industrial and medical reasons.
Okay,
and to release the prisoners.
Okay, Jeff, I don't think you addressed the answer to Morgan's question. She's asking if you are distinguishing when people are on drugs and they commit crimes. Or Morgan, can you clarify the question? Because I think we kind of went off target.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm saying, generally speaking, I don't believe in life imprisonment for people who who have drug problems or who have mental illness. For example, people who are not just necessarily inherently violent, and for people who are not committing violent crimes. If you're a drug dealer, or I'm on board with you there. Where I'm asking if you have, a differing of opinion is for people who habitually use drugs and habitually commit nonviolent crimes. Where do you draw that line between, okay, the 3 strikes rule, a blanket rule never really is the answer necessarily.
Sure. So I'd like to give my viewpoint on this. Now, I think that when a person is addicted to any kind of drug, there is always the probability that the addiction is going to take over, and if they don't have money for the drugs, they will commit petty crimes. So the solution that I think is literally the most reasonable one is to treat drug addiction in a rehabilitation facility and not in prison. We need to treat addiction like a disease, because addiction is a disease and it must be treated as such. And I know that making that statement, people who smoke marijuana will, almost 100% of them will say, oh, I'm not addicted, but okay, I mean, I know people that have been, they've been smoking it since they were teenagers, and they, try to get off and they can't get off. So at the end of the day, we are dealing with an epidemic of addiction in this society, and that is the issue that needs to be addressed. And as a psychologist, addiction is a spiritual disease, and people will commit crimes, to feed and fuel their addiction. So I am making a distinction on the show, by saying that I am not saying that people who commit violent crimes should not go to prison. But what I'm saying is that people who commit nonviolent crimes should not be thrown in jail with people who are violent criminals. I'm emphasizing that. So your question, Morgan, is very, very relevant, and it needs to be dealt with from that perspective, that a petty crime should not, be treated the same as a violent crime. And if the addiction is treated, then we would not have petty criminals who are breaking into people's houses and stealing things because they're trying to feed their addiction. Did that answer your question at all?
It did, and I would absolutely agree I think there has to be a point though where we do have a limit to how many crimes can you commit, especially when you have been offered treatment. And I see this specifically in Washington State, specifically in Seattle, where it is a very progressive city. There are lots of treatment programs. And if you refuse, which you have the right to do so, I do believe that the next option is jail, because allowing you to go back on the street and continue to commit crimes, even if they are nonviolent, to feed the habit, that's still putting other citizens at risk and essentially paying for the choice to not go to a rehabilitation center, but then not having jail as an alternative.
Well, but I think it would be simple, to make it mandatory that the people are put into a rehab center, and an effective one. Not all rehab centers are equal. So I think
Absolutely
that
right.
issue can be addressed. But are you saying that nonviolent criminals should be put in prison with violent criminals, and that nonviolent criminals should?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. But I do believe that if you are there's jail and there's prison. Mm-hmm. And I do not think that obviously someone who is a nonviolent criminal needs to be in a prison. They should go to a jail with other nonviolent criminals. But I do believe if you don't go to the rehabilitation center, if you don't fulfill the requirements of the rehabilitation center, then jail should absolutely be the next option, because you can't just commit crime and there be absolutely no punishment for it whatsoever if you choose to not receive the help that is provided to you.
Well, I think that is a part of the problem, is that you have people polarized on either side of the issue, where they believe in prison. But I know, and I've gone in and spoken in the prison system, to prisoners, and what I know is that our prison system does not work. It is corrupt. It does not reform. It is privatized for profit, and so sending people to prison is not a solution in a prison system that is designed to exploit people for slave labor. So I will differ with you on that, and we're just going to agree to disagree on that one. I still think that we could solve it, in a much more constructive manner by treating it as a disease and not as a crime. So, Jeff, I'm going to bring you in specifically to address that issue.
Well, I consider a portion of this a spiritual matter, mm-hmm. where we, as stewards of the laws of the system needs to be reformed, mm-hmm. and those of us that are sober and that are in charge of making decisions, we now have the opportunity to speak up, whether it's through film or through radio, to start the dialogue. If we don't talk about it like we're doing, then we won't be able to come to conclusions or make a difference for these people that are lost, because addiction is something that is frightful. We're losing great musicians, in our life and time, because they got addicted to the pharmaceuticals. And so it's the same with the people on the street. We don't want criminals, people that are innocently doing their drugs to be, that are addicted to turn into criminals. Yeah. But like you said, it does happen. And so it's up to us as radio talk show hosts and as spiritual beings to make our, if we are making dialogue and opening up people's hearts and minds and letting them know, then I think the people in charge can also make the decisions for reform of the system. I think the system's broke.
Well, and I'm not even, it's so broken, I'm not even sure if we can reform it. But I agree with you. We do need to keep the dialogue going. I'd like to share a comment when I posted this last night from a Facebook friend who said that drug laws gain support not by normal standards of logic, but by a mostly unspoken yet understood attempt at legislating morality. This applies across the board to all of of what we have come to call victimless crimes, from gambling, the parking tickets, through having to license your dog, up to laws that make one form of sexual expression legal while another is deemed illegal. The purpose has never been to make society better or safer, although such initiatives are always grounded in that rhetoric, but instead the purpose has always been to establish a societal norm that reinforces a particular morality that is convenient for those in power. Because logic has been removed, logic alone cannot and will not change public opinion any more than Sam Harris would be able to convince the Pope that his belief structures are invalid. Privatization serves one purpose, and that is to accommodate the transfer of the commons, what we all share, the land, the water, the air itself, and concepts of government, into the hands of an elite few. This is done through application of the other great but unquestioned faith the U.S. and its allies promote to great effect, capitalism. All things, including human life, must be held up to scrutiny, and determinations must be made regarding the efficiency, the cost effectiveness, the investment to return ratio, and of course the degree of control such transfers allow those in power to impose on the powerless. Thus, not only can immoral drug users be incarcerated, but their incarceration must be profitable through what amounts to slave labor. This is a negative feedback loop. The need for cheap labor in order to create profit creates a need for increased incarceration. And that was from my friend Lee Burkett on Facebook, and he always has brilliant input on any topic that I post. So, you know, it creates this vicious cycle of what I've talked about before, of us going to the people in power who create the problem. In effect, when you have a society that is full of inequity, that is full of discrimination, and all kinds of laws that prevent people from having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you will in effect create criminals and then punish the very criminals that you create because you want slave labor. So I don't think we can go to the people in power and beg them to fix a problem that they create and that they are profiting off of. So that's really what I'm trying to put out here on the air, is that this problem, you know, is a microcosm of a much bigger problem of us not, you know, taking responsibility for changing the system, and us really thinking that we can go and beg the people in power, please change this system that benefits you. That is not going to happen. So that's what I'm throwing out on the air, is I'm saying until we really change our viewpoint on begging people in power who are corrupt and who care nothing about, you know, the common people to do something that benefits us, I think we're the crazy ones. So that's my take on it, Morgan. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it goes beyond this subject.
Yes.
Because, you know, but like I said, I don't believe that what we're doing is the answer by any means. Otherwise, generally, we'd all be safer and happier.
Right.
But I think with most things, you're right. Reform isn't possible. We need a complete redo. Mm-hmm. We have to hit the start over button.
Yeah.
Because the people who are in power, they aren't going to do anything. And your friend's comments, you know, extremely poignant, and I think it speaks to, once again, across the board, we're seeing increasing privatization, not just within the prison system,
education,
but we see it even
everywhere.
more so in healthcare.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, schools, and I went to a private school, but that I'll be the first to admit, I had a much better education
You definitely
than people who, you know, who went to public schools, generally speaking, and that should not be the case. There should be equality. Everyone should get, you know, the same high level of education. And I think privatization, which is one thing that, you know, I think people don't necessarily see it unilaterally as everything is becoming privatized, but everything is becoming privatized.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the root of inequality in this country, is privatization of everything.
Yes. Okay, and Jeff, I'd like for you to address Lee Burkett's comment.
Well, I also am in alignment with everything that your Facebook friend has put forth. I think that, and I also agree that reform is not the answer, but the redo is, as Morgan said, a reset would be great. Install the new operating system, and through us. Again, we are stewards of the word.
Yes.
And like Amy Goodman and Howard Zinn, who's no longer with us, teaching us about history.
Yes.
What we didn't learn from these mongers that are trying to overrun it's not about conspiracy theory. That's not the topic we're talking about. We're talking about live, real world issues that are affecting families. And when I interviewed when I interviewed the children on episode number 2, there was a young lady. She was 4 years old, and her dad was in for a nonviolent drug crime for 25 years. She didn't get to have her papa.
Right. Yeah, I mean, families are being torn apart, and when you look at the statistics, 1 in 38 Hispanic males are in prison, 1 in 15, African-American males, and 1 in 106 white males are in prison. That is absolutely absurd in a country that is supposed to be free. That is not freedom. And every mother in this country who is the mother of a son, I know that they cannot sleep at night when their son is out, with his friends driving a car because, there's this fear that, oh my God, they could get pulled over and God knows what happens, especially if you're a kid of color. That shouldn't be the case in the land of the free and the home of the brave. We should not be afraid of police officers or being pulled over, for a speeding ticket and being put in jail for driving a car.
Well, let's just talk to through the airwaves right now, and I'll do an Om chant for the people in charge.
I agree. We need to take it to a higher level. I don't think that this is going to be solved here. We need help from up on high to raise the consciousness of the people to stand up and be sovereign, because begging the people in power, we've seen that doesn't work. They just give us more draconian laws.
Back in the 70s or the 80s, there was a song that was kind of a new wave song. It was it's cruel to be cool, or cool to be cruel. Now it should be cool to school and to change things. It should be cool. We should make this so fun and so amazing that that everyone, even the people that write the laws or who are in charge of the laws, will say, yes, it's time. This draconian system can be reformed with one push of one pen of one button.
Yeah, and I think that the people themselves need to realize that we have the numbers, and then the people who are in power because we give them that power. They do not go to jail for white collar crimes. The poor people go to jail. We need to look at that. So what I'm saying is that we, the people, are going to have to reframe the way that we look at problems in society and look at the actual history of the problem and the contributing factors to the problem and who is profiting off the problem. So I think in order to solve any problem, all you got to do is follow the money trail. Who's making money off of it? And if people are making money off of a problem, you're not going to solve that problem until you take the profit out of it. And so I think with the prison industrial complex, because there is so much profit in it, it has to start there. The solution has to start with taking profit out of prisons. So, Morgan, I'd like to turn this over to you.
Couldn't agree more. Like you hit the nail on the head. There's actually a fantastic book called Dark Money by Jane Mayer, and it generally espouses what you were saying about following the money. All of the problems we have follow the money. And it's a great book to read, especially, since we're in an election year. I believe that you're right, that this is 1,000% a consciousness issue, because the people in power aren't going to solve the problem. They're making money from the problem. And generally, people believe that we have the right solution. Last week, John Oliver had a brilliant discussion about belief versus fact, and how the people in power basically are able to talk people into believing something and equating it as fact. And so for my generation, I would encourage people to first ask for discernment, ask for clarity, and an understanding, open heart, and then open a book.
Yes.
Watch a documentary, and then read the book again. Watch the documentary again. And if it doesn't mean that it will immediately change your opinion, but if it doesn't move you to think or rethink anything, then go back, read it again, watch it again, because fact and belief are two different things, and I think that's a huge difference that people in this country are going to have to really start understanding and be cognizant of. Just because you believe it does not mean it's fact.
Yeah, and I want to add that, we're talking about follow the money, but also money is about power, and power is about control. So the people that are in power want control. The best way to control people is to keep them, under the influence of prescription drugs, any kind of drug. So what I'm saying is that, the drug problem, should be treated as a spiritual disease and not have people put in prison for drugs. So I'm not a proponent of drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or any of those substances. I am a proponent of everyone being free to receive the help that they need, and it's free will. If people want to do drugs, they have the free will to do that and learn their lessons, but I don't think that we should try to legislate everything in people's lives.